Amen. Thank you. One thing my dad ingrained in me that I knew from the time I was 16 years old and I started driving all the way until this point where I was just out of school is that it was important to keep your car washed and waxed. That was a very important part of life. And if I can admit to you here today privately, please don't tell him. It'll crush him if you tell him at this point. I hated waxing my car. It was not something I liked to do. So when I saw this infomercial for this clear coating product that you got in and everybody did it and everybody did it perfectly and it made the car shine and you never had to wax it again, I ordered this and it came in the mail and I looked at it and I go, wow, that is clear. That is just like water. It was really runny and it had this application tool and I started putting it on my car after I washed it and I was so excited. And then I noticed that it wasn't always even. Now, it could have been the user problem, but there were some ridges in there, and there was some unevenness to it, and that stuff dried really quickly. And it looked bad. And I had to live with it for the rest of the time I had that car. Now, it wasn't too long after that I would have gotten a subscription to something called Consumer Reports. And before I bought anything that I didn't know that much about, I looked at what they tested and what the recommendations are to make sure I didn't mess something up. Now, if you buy anything online, you don't want to buy it till you go down and see how many stars they got. I mean, it can make or break a company on how many stars and what the recommendations are. For restaurants, the waiters and waitresses are always saying, give us 5 stars. We got to have 5 stars. And they make those recommendations. And we get recommendations for a lot of things, whether it's from friends and family or online. We see how other people recommend things. When we do anything as the trustees get ready to work, they look for recommendations on who has had someone work and they do the best work. The question for us is, why do we accept a recommendation, or what do we do with that recommendation? And maybe it's even more important, who is giving that recommendation and how does that help me in my situation? Now, today when we talk about this centurion, there is no doubt that he received some sort of a recommendation when he was in trouble on going to Jesus and having Jesus figure this out. And it's amazing how he acted on this recommendation. As we continue in our series called Greater out of the book of Matthew, where Jesus shows us so many things that he said, this is great or this is greater. We look at greater faith today, and we look at someone who we would not think of normally, who Jesus pointed out. Will you stand as you are able? Our gospel lesson is from Matthew 8, verses 5 through 13. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I am a man under authority and soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and this one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. If I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, and they will take their places in the feast with Abraham. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown aside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you had believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment. The word of God for the people of God. Amen. You may be seated. Now, if you think about that centurion for a moment and the position he would have been in, Rome had conquered Israel. Israel was subject to Rome. In fact, Roman soldiers, you know the verse where Jesus said, if someone compels you to walk 1 mile, walk 2 miles with them. Well, that's tied to if a Roman soldier comes up to you and says, "Hey, the law says you have to carry my equipment for 1 mile." Jesus is saying, do it 2 miles. In the first century Jewish society, Romans looked down on Israelites, and Israelites despised the Romans. Even if they couldn't publicly talk bad about them, you know they had their gossip corners where they were going, "Oh man, that Roman soldier, he's such a jerk. I can't believe Rome is so oppressive to us." And here is Jesus talking to everyone around him, and all of a sudden he is interrupted by a centurion. Now, that centurion knows enough to know that Jews think of them as unclean, that a Jew couldn't go into the home of an unclean Gentile, as this Roman soldier would have been. Now, the Roman soldier, when he says, "There are people over me, and then I have people subject to me," they usually broke down that Roman army in groups of 100. He would have probably had about 100 peers at whatever level of command, whether it was a sergeant, whether it was a lieutenant, whatever it was. There were probably 100 of them, and then each one of them, as in this centurion, had 100 people below him that had to move at his every command. Everything he would say, they would have to do. He says, go, they go. He says, stay here, they stay. He says, go out and scout ahead, they have to go out and scout ahead. He says, go to this village, they would have to go to this village. They're under his command. And somehow, I don't know who told him, Matthew doesn't give us Matthew and Luke and Mark, none of them tell us who told this Roman soldier, but I know someone recommended Jesus. He's desperate. His servant is paralyzed. He's suffering. He is about ready to die. And somebody says, well, I have heard of this Jew who can heal people. Now, there were rumors about people who could heal people at that time. There were rumors about people who could do miraculous things. But this is the first time where we see with Jesus that somebody said, I have people under your command. And he told Jesus, just say the word, and I know my servant will be healed. That whatever was in this creation was subject to the command of Jesus. And the Roman soldier knew that as well as anyone. And it was unheard of up to this point of saying Jesus didn't have to be physically present in that place to do something miraculous. And when Jesus heard this, he turned, and it says, he turned to his followers. These are the people who said they want to know more about Jesus, who also said, I want to follow Jesus. And he said, I haven't seen faith this great in all of Israel. Ouch. That's got to sting a little bit. Jesus is saying this, but he goes on to say, people are going to come from the east and from the west and sit at the table at the feast of heaven with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's a way of saying the Gentiles are coming into the party. They're going to be at the feast. It's everyone who calls on the name of the Lord, everyone who says they want to follow Jesus, everyone who takes their faith and puts it in the trust of Jesus will be there. And then he says, but the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside, which he could be talking to the Jews. He could be talking to people who say they want to follow Jesus, but they don't really know how to put their faith in Jesus. And he compares this Roman soldier's faith, this guy who was unclean, this guy who had probably committed atrocities, to the Israelites, or had certainly approved of atrocities. Jesus is saying, his faith is greater than yours. Now, those words are tough enough, but if we look at our own lives, where is our faith great? And where do we need greater faith in our lives? Now, this next part is going to be a challenge, especially if your lifestyle is still, okay, when I'm in church, this is the follower of Christ I'm going to be, and when I'm out there in the world, I can do whatever I want and say whatever I want and be a different person. If you separate those two things, this is going to be tougher. And if we're honest, we're each going to have some stuff we need to build on here. And again, unless we don't need to build, we've already reached perfection and we're already perfectly Christ-like. One of the things they teach children when they get to kindergarten or first grade, as school is just starting up right now, is to see if you see a piece of cake and then a smaller crumb, and you go, which one is bigger? You know? And then eventually you learn the symbols, you know, with the alligator mouth opening up, or the mouth straight on, or the alligator mouth pointing the other way for greater than, equal to, or less than. When we look at each one of this is not an exhaustive list, but they're things that we may struggle with in our lives, where we say, is my faith greater in God, or is it greater in this? Now, in your bulletins, this will give you something to think about and something to work on as we work through this. In the flap where we have the bulletin notes, you see the big greater than, equal to, less than symbol, or less than, equal to, greater than symbol, and below we have faith in. If we just walk through each one of these, is my faith less in God, less than, equal to, or greater than my faith in myself? Circle one of those. I was telling our grace group last week how I was at when we were at our mission trip at the homeless shelter in Kansas City, Missouri, City Union Mission, and we're working and doing what we can on our part. And that first afternoon we mowed, and we mowed inside the fence, and then I started mowing outside the fence, and I went around the corner, and there was this huge lot. And it looked like no volunteer or anybody else had mowed this all summer long. And I stared at that and I thought, I don't know if anybody's going to mow this. I should try. And so I mowed all the way down, which was like a half a block, to the other end. And at that other end, there were some construction workers there. And one of the construction workers looked at me, and he looked at my push lawnmower, and he said, "Are you going to mow all of this," which was all on a hill, "with that?" And I said, "That's the plan." And he said, "You a bad man." And all I could think of is Stephen A. Smith always talking about Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, and saying, "He's a bad man." And from that moment on, that motivated me to make sure we got that done before we leave. Now, I'm telling you this because I was motivated by my own pride. At that moment, I wasn't doing it for the homeless. I was doing it to show that I was a bad man. Sometimes in our lives, where do we put more faith in ourselves? I can do this. I can make it happen. I can force my way through this. I can do this. And we forget that we have a God who is greater than us. And we put more faith in ourselves than we do in God. We put more faith in trusting ourselves than we do in God. And we end up loving ourselves more than we love our neighbors. So where are you at on that? Circle one of those. Less than, equal to, or greater than on myself. The next one is is your faith in God less than, equal to, or greater than your career or your financial security? Now I say this again because I have a propensity of coming out of college, I took the job that would pay the most because it paid time and a half overtime, and I worked for a giant CPA firm that I thought I could make the most money at. And I sacrificed a lot of things in order to make more money at that. And even in the ministry, if I didn't have my family to check me, then I would probably work way too many hours and sacrifice so many other things. Is God less than, equal to, or greater than your career or financial security? When I went to the firm I worked at in Salina, the managing partner said to me at the end of the interview, here we take, we go in, this is the order of where we are. It's faith first, family second, and work third. And he goes, well, to be honest, faith and family, it's hard to tell which one of those is first. But that is our philosophy. And I was sold on that, to see that faith and family came before work, and it was more important. The next one is God. Is God, my faith in God, less than or greater to or equal than my education or my degree or whatever that might be? I remember when I was a CPA, looking at other people and colleagues who were doing tax returns that weren't CPAs. Sometimes we'd just start thinking they can't do them as good as us. They're not as good as us. What in your education or your degree, how do you treat other people, and how do you look at other people, and how do you use that for God's glory instead of using it to step on other people? Next, is my faith in God less than, equal to, or greater than family and friends? Are there things with my family and friends where I choose them over God? I mean, Jesus had some tough words on this. He said, if you do not love me more than anyone else in your life, then you really don't love me. What do I compromise? What do I put aside with God to gain favor or feel like somebody else would love me? And how can I use my faith in God to enhance my relationship with family and friends? The next one is my faith in God less than, equal to, or greater than my love and my faith in my home, where I find my security, or personal property, things we have? What is better to spend money on, or how does God influence how I spend money on, and how much I spend on a home or on a car or everything else? Where is God in that decision-making process? Am I more hurt if I don't experience God during the week, or if something happens to my car, like an accident, or like putting a clear coat on the car that you definitely should not put on the car? Next Is my faith in God less than, equal to, or greater than my faith in the government or in the military? Where does my peace come from? Does my peace come from the fact that I know that we have the biggest military in the world? Do my values come from whatever the government says my values need to be? Does my sense of responsibility in the community, culture, and in the world come from my faith in God? Or does it come from someone who is running for office? Does my faith in God, is it less than, equal to, or greater than my faith in drugs? We could be talking legal or illegal drugs. There are 36 million people addicted to opiates. 36 million. These are painkillers. Things that we might start off on in the right direction, but they seem to help more than even the physical pain, and people get addicted to them. I mean, addictions can even be things like food. Food can be relied upon for comfort and joy. Where does my peace come from? Does it come from drugs? Does it come from something I put in my body that alters my mood or my feelings? Or does it come from God? Do you believe we have a God who can give us peace? Do you believe we have a God who can strengthen us? Do you believe we have a God who will guide us with wisdom to listen to the right counsel and take the right amount of drugs when it's legal and back off of that? Where does God fit in all that? Finally, is my faith less than, equal to, or greater than what I see on the media, in the news, through Hollywood, Disney, Netflix, sports stars, and everything that's poured out? Do I compromise my faith with that, or is my faith strong enough to carry me through that? The influence of those things in our society cannot be underestimated. And the influence of God is often so much smaller than these things. Where is your faith? Who do you put your faith in? CNN gave a report on a skydiver named Luke Akins. Now, how many of you think skydiving itself is, you got to be a little bit crazy to do that? To jump out of an airplane. Now, how many of you think you have to be absolutely insane to jump out of an airplane without a parachute? Is that insanity? Should there be a picture of that in the dictionary when you look up insanity? Well, Luke Akins plummeted from an airplane in 2016 that was 25,000 feet in the air without any kind of parachute, landing on a 100-foot by 100-foot net that he had set up after he reached terminal velocity of 120 miles per hour. Oh, and if that's not crazy enough, he had a wife and a 4-year-old son. Now, for Luke, who did this, that seems like it was crazy, he did training over and over and over again. He's done 18,000 jumps. He prepared by doing dozens of jumps, naturally wearing a parachute, aiming at a smaller net, and then working his way towards it. The big jump. Akins said this: whenever people attempt to push the limits of what's considered humanly possible, they're inadvertently described as crazy. I'm here to show you that as if we approach it the right way and we test it and prove it that it's good to go, we can do these things no matter that we don't think are possible. Raise your hand if you still think he's insane. Okay, before we go on, don't try this at home. I'm not going to try this at home. But the point is, greater faith is believing in Jesus for big things. I mean, the truth is we don't have a little God, we have a big God. Do we trust in Jesus in the biggest things we face in life? Do we trust in Jesus for both the small and the large things? Do we step out in faith and have a faith that is greater today than we ever had in our lives? Or are we just more and more pessimistic and we think God is less and less significant in our life? Greater faith says we are more like the centurion than just someone who goes to church and God doesn't make a difference in their life, who has two different lifestyles. Greater faith says this: step out in faith. Trust Jesus for more than you ever have before. Walk with Jesus in everything you do. Know that God's got your back. Know that God is big. Know that God will go with you through anything you do at any point in your life. Know that in the deepest valley or on the highest mountain, whatever you struggle with in your life, that we have a God that is good and a God who loves you and a God who is bigger than anything we face. In fact, in our lives, we walk by faith. We don't walk by what we can see